I nearly tossed the envelope into the recycling bin without a second thought. It looked too elegant, too formal, velvet-lined, cream cardstock with gilded lettering that spelled out the Dupree residence in looping script. My first impulse was annoyance, another solicitation from some luxury brand I had no interest in. But the return address stopped my thumb halfway to the bin. The Devereux household, Old Oaks Estate, Briarwood Lane. Raina's parents. My in-laws. I slipped a finger under the flap and peeled it open. Inside lay a single card. At the top, in the same gilded script, was the Devereux family crest, a pair of entwined peacocks beneath a crown. Below it, the words stung. You are cordially invited to celebrate the 30th birthday of Camille Devereux at the Dupree residence. No RSVP, no date or time, just an assumption that I, the homeowner, was already part of the guest list. I stared at it, counting the ways it was wrong. The venue. The house I'd built, brick by brick, over 8 relentless years. The host's name, not mine. My own name, the one on the deed, was nowhere to be found. My chest tightened. 8 years ago, when Raina and I first toured this ramshackle Victorian with its sagging porch and chipped shutters, my heart had beat in my throat. I saw blank canvases where others saw flaws. I imagined late-night sanding oak floors, painting trim by moonlight, turning dead lawns into a tapestry of native grasses. When we signed the papers, I did it with trembling hands. I'd shouldered every renovation cost myself, 2 promotions, a small inheritance, and every overtime dollar at my landscaping firm. My sweat was in the mortar. My vision was in every arch of the pergola. And somehow, none of that mattered to the Devereux. To them, it was always a Devereux family property, a trophy ready for their next grand event. I tracked down Raina in the kitchen, where she was unpacking groceries from Trader Joe's. She didn't look up when I dropped the invitation on the counter. You got something from your parents, I said. She glanced at it, her eyebrows lifting a fraction. Oh, that. They're using the house for Camille's party. Her tone was airy, matter-of-fact, as if I'd handed her an old cereal box. They didn't think to invite you by name? I asked, voice low. She folded her arms. You're my husband. It's assumed. I felt my jaw tighten. Assumed. I repeated. They don't assume I exist. Memories tumbled forward. The first Thanksgiving when Celeste told me to fetch more rolls, then refused to look me in the eye. The evening I presented her with a handcrafted dining table only to have her ask, is this up to Devereux standards? The silent judgment. The constant need to prove I belonged. Yet nothing had ever cut as deep as this omission, this blank space on a gilded card that spelled out my absence. That night, I wandered the halls alone. Upstairs, the master bedroom walked straight into my memory. The piece-by-piece assembly of the walk-in closet, the late-night debates over paint swatches, the triumph when Raina cried at how beautiful it looked. Downstairs, the living room windows framed the garden I designed, a winding path of limestone, Japanese maples, beds of lavender and salvia. Each plant was chosen for its resilience, each stone laid with intention. And all of it, to Celeste and Wallace, was just scenery for Camille's grand entrance. I opened my laptop and pulled up the deed. There it was, Christopher Dupree, sole owner. No fine print about family use or non-Devereux occupancy. My ownership was absolute. Yet in a single piece of cardstock, the Devereux had rewritten history. My hand shook as I printed the deed, highlighted my name, and placed it beside the invitation. It felt absurd to let a card dictate my self-worth. I had poured my heart into this house. I had built everything from nothing. The insult wasn't their use of the house. It was their erasure of me. Sleep came fitfully. I dreamed of peacocks strutting through empty halls, their jeweled feathers brushing against my skin as they ignored my presence. I woke at dawn, body tense with resolve. I gathered the invitation, the deed, and the letterhead from my landscape firm, and sat at the kitchen table. Raina peeked in, coffee mug in hand. "You're up early," she murmured. I didn't respond. Instead, I drafted an email to Celeste and Wallace. Subject: Ownership of 411 West Thornhill. Dear Celeste and Wallace, I noticed the invitation to Camille's birthday gala lists the Dupree residence as the venue, without naming the homeowner. Please find attached documentation showing my legal ownership of the property. While you are of course welcome to host your daughter's celebration here, I would appreciate being acknowledged as the host and homeowner on all pertinent materials. Sincerely, Christopher Dupree. I paused, fingers hovering above the send button. This wasn't just about titles on an invitation, it was about respect. About seeing the effort behind the walls and the hands that built them. About insisting that for once, I wouldn't sit silently while my identity was erased. Raina hovered at the doorway, face unreadable. "Is this necessary?" she asked. I clicked send. "Yes," I said quietly. "It's necessary." The email whooshed out into cyberspace, and with it, the first crack in the facade of assumed silence I'd lived under. As the sun rose over the garden path I'd carved through the weeds, I felt the stirrings of something long buried. The certainty that a home built with one's own hands deserves recognition, and that, this time, I would claim it. Raina didn't say anything when I brought it up again the next morning. She was spreading avocado across a piece of multigrain toast, her face set in that infuriating calm she'd perfected after years of watching her parents steamroll through conversations. I stood at the kitchen island, arms crossed, the invitation card still sitting where I'd left it. "They didn't ask," I said. My voice wasn't loud, but the restraint in it made the air feel thick. She looked up, knife mid-swipe. "Ask what?" She replied, as if she didn't already know. "To host a party in my house," I said, the word might carrying a weight I didn't bother to dilute. "They just assumed." Again, she gave that tight, neutral smile, the one that always made me feel like a problem to manage instead of a partner to understand. "It's for Camille. It's just one night." And with that, she lifted her toast and left the room like it wasn't even a discussion worth finishing. I stood there alone, staring at the cracked ceramic mug I'd been meaning to replace for months. Somehow it suddenly seemed symbolic. Like everything else in this place I'd once dreamed of turning into a legacy, it was chipped but still standing, just barely. The phone call came an hour later. I let it go to voicemail at first, then picked up on the second ring. Celeste's voice oozed from the speaker like syrup over glass. "Darling, your house is perfect for Camille's party. The pool, the view, the driveway space, it's going to wow the Garretts." That name again. The Garretts. They weren't friends, they were a family name wielded like a business card. Old money with newer egos, and apparently Camille's latest romantic entanglement. Wallace, her husband, joined in from the background. "You've got to contribute something to this family. At least the house is useful." The line crackled. "That garden's finally paying off, huh?" I gripped the edge of the counter, my knuckles turning white. "Did it ever occur to either of you to ask?" I asked, biting off each word. Silence for a beat. Then Celeste chuckled. "Christopher, don't be so sensitive. We thought you'd be happy to help. This is family." And that was the thing. They always used that word like a battering ram. Family. The excuse for boundary violations, for erasure, for standing in my living room and acting like guests at a luxury resort. Raina's silence in the background of that call spoke louder than anything else. She was there. She heard. And she said nothing. That night, I stood in the living room and looked around. Everything in sight had my fingerprint on it. The reclaimed wood bookshelves I'd built from discarded oak. The walnut coffee table I sanded and stained myself because we couldn't afford a designer one when we first moved in. The cream walls I'd painted after midnight with sore arms and podcasts playing in my earbuds. Every light fixture, every screw, every patched floorboard, it was mine. My sweat. My hours. And yet somehow, I had become a tenant in my own story. I opened the hallway closet and pulled out a suitcase. Not for me to leave, at least not yet. But to start. I didn't slam drawers or make a spectacle. I just moved with purpose, folding shirts with the kind of quiet focus that made me feel sane again. I placed the suitcase on the edge of the bed and began filling it with the essentials, documents, journals, chargers, a hoodie she never liked, the one that reminded me of who I used to be. My office drawers were next. I found the deed, the home improvement receipts, the architectural plans I'd drawn up for the extension we never built. I stacked them neatly. Then I logged into my email and typed a message I never thought I'd send. Subject, private real estate consultation to Harlan Liu message. "Harlan, it's time. I want to discuss the possibility of a quiet sale. No listing, no signs. Just the right buyer, quickly. Let's talk numbers." See, Dupree, I hit send. The cursor blinked for a moment, then the message disappeared. Just like that, the idea that had been simmering beneath the surface finally found air. The next morning, the house was bustling in the way only a home about to be misused can be. Camille had sent over event planners, 3 of them. Young, well-dressed, disinterested in the fact that I was home at all. One of them tapped a measuring tape against the sliding glass door to the backyard. "Do you know if the champagne fountain will block the view from the pool?" she asked. "I want it centered for the Garrett's photo op." I didn't answer. I simply watched her like she was speaking a language I no longer understood. Later that day, Raina came home early and found me rearranging boxes in the garage. She didn't ask why. She didn't even pretend to notice. "The caterer will need access to the kitchen by 3 o'clock on the day of," she said casually. "And we'll need extra ice." Her tone was businesslike, rehearsed, like I was an event coordinator and not the man she used to kiss goodnight. I wiped sweat from my forehead with the back of my wrist and looked at her. "You haven't asked me once how I feel about any of this." She looked confused for half a second, then dismissive. "Chris, it's Camille. It's just a party." Her words didn't sting. They scraped, slow and steady like sandpaper against skin. That was the moment something in me fully detached. I nodded. "Okay," I said simply. She seemed relieved that I wasn't going to fight. I let her walk away thinking she'd won. Let her believe I'd fallen back into that familiar, pliable role they all preferred, grateful, silent, and visible. But I wasn't packing to leave in defeat. I was organizing for a transition. My home was becoming a stage for a performance I wanted no part in. But what none of them knew, what they wouldn't know until it was too late, was that the curtain was about to drop. And when it did, I wouldn't be in the audience. I'd be gone, completely, not just from the room, but from the narrative they had written without me. That night, I zipped the suitcase and slid it into the car trunk. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't loud, but it was real. Something inside me had shifted. Not out of bitterness, but clarity. If they were going to reduce me to a footnote in a home I built, then they didn't deserve to see the next chapter. And I was ready, more ready than I'd been in years, to write it alone. They loved that word. Failure. They never said it to my face, of course. The Devereaux were far too skilled in the art of polished contempt. But I'd heard the whispers through the cracks. At dinners when the wine was 2 glasses deep. At brunches when Raina would go powder her nose, leaving me alone with Celeste and Wallace and their pointed anecdotes about real men with real ambition. To them, I was the cautionary tale, the regrettable detour their daughter had taken in her mid-20s, the passionate, slightly unrefined landscaping architect who didn't wear cufflinks and used his hands for work instead of raising them for champagne toasts. I wasn't always what they labeled me. At 27, I had launched my own firm, taking on small but challenging projects, building outdoor spaces that made people feel something. My designs didn't scream wealth, they whispered restoration. By 35, I had a modest but thriving business, clients from 3 different states, and a reputation for creating spaces that breathed. I wasn't flashy, but I was proud. I didn't need to prove anything to the world, just to myself, until I met Raina. She was the kind of woman who walked into a room and immediately reset the temperature. Not because of vanity, but because she listened to people like their words had weight. She noticed things. We met at a sustainability conference. She was working for an environmental nonprofit then, more earthy than elite, despite her last name. Or maybe I just didn't look closely enough. She asked questions about my work that no one else had ever asked. About soil integrity, microclimates, the personality of trees. When we started dating, it felt like finally being seen. The first year was easy. We spent weekends sketching designs on napkins, planting succulents in her tiny apartment balcony garden, dreaming of the life we'd build. The second year was harder. Her parents found out about me, and it was like watching a tide come in, slow, silent, inevitable. They weren't cruel, not outwardly. But they had a way of making you feel like you were an exchange student at a dinner table of lifelong insiders. Every conversation with Wallace was a test. Every compliment from Celeste was loaded. "So nice that you're doing something creative." Raina always had a thing for the artsy types. When we found the house, it was love at first sight for me. A fixer-upper Victorian tucked in an old neighborhood with mature trees and stone sidewalks. It needed everything, which was why I wanted it. Raina had hesitations. Her parents thought it was quaint, which was their way of saying unacceptable. But I made a promise. 8 years, and this place will be a sanctuary. I'd save us money by doing it all myself. I took on more clients, stretched days into nights, and slowly, board by board, I made it happen. I never asked for a dime from the Devereaux. Not when we were behind on plumbing costs. Not when I maxed out my second credit card to finish the kitchen. I wanted to be a man they couldn't dismiss, a husband they couldn't sneer at. And for a while, I thought it worked. They stopped making comments about Reina settling. They even asked for my opinion when redoing their pool deck, but it was never respect, it was convenience. Then came Camille's party. It started quietly, like all insults from Celeste do. First, a phone call to Reina. Then emails to caterers with my address casually included. Then floral designers showed up to get a sense of the space. They spoke to me like I was the groundskeeper. You did the garden? Lovely. We'll need to move some of the planters for the photo wall. Hope that's all right. I smiled and nodded, biting my tongue so hard it hurt. They thought my silence was consent. It wasn't. The worst part? Reina. She didn't defend me. Not once. When I brought it up, she sighed like I was being difficult. Chris, it's one day. Camille's turning 30. It means a lot to my mom. I stared at her, trying to find the woman who used to laugh at how ridiculous her mother's demands were. But she was slipping away, bit by bit, and I was starting to realize I didn't know how to hold on without losing myself in the process. The week before, Wallace sent over a list of touch-ups he wanted completed before the event. You might want to repaint the pergola. It'll photograph better, he'd written. The pergola I built with reclaimed cedar. The one Reina cried under the night I proposed. They wanted to move things, repaint them, erase the fingerprints I'd left on every surface to fit their glossy vision of what their daughter's life should look like. And what's worse, they acted like I should be grateful for the attention. I kept a journal during that time, scribbled thoughts late at night when I couldn't sleep. One page read, "How do you watch someone take your work and smile while they hand it off to people who never lifted a damn finger for it?" Another just said, "Don't burn it down. Sell it instead." And that's exactly what I planned to do. I didn't tell Reina. She was too far gone into the performance. She'd started wearing her mother's jewelry again, started saying things like, "Presentation matters, and it's just optics." I didn't blame her completely. The Devereaux don't raise children. They sculpt them. Mold them into gleaming marble statues they can display at galas and weddings, each one a reflection of their legacy. Reina was just trying to survive inside that cage. But I had built this home from the ground up. I had poured myself into the soil, the beams, the air ducts. They wanted to use it like a stage. So I decided to change the script. I let them schedule everything. I nodded when Camille's assistant emailed to ask if we could install outdoor heaters by the pool. I kept the illusion going, one last favor, one last role to play. But behind the scenes, I was making calls. Quiet ones. Strategic ones. The house that had become a symbol of my erasure was about to become my final declaration. They had the house, the guests, the planners, the cake, but they didn't have the deed. I did. And soon, they'd know what that actually meant. Harlan Liu's office sat at the end of a quiet corridor on the 4th floor of a glass building overlooking the city's financial district. There was nothing flashy about it. No chrome nameplate, no glass awards, no oversized leather chairs to announce ego. That was what I liked about him. He didn't need to impress anyone. He dealt in silence and certainty. When I walked in, he glanced up from his tablet, then stood to greet me with a firm handshake and a nod. "Christopher Dupree," he said. "I've read your email. Let's talk." I'd rehearsed what I wanted to say in my head a dozen times, but when I sat down in that room, gray walls, dark oak desk, and the soft hum of city noise beneath us, it came out quieter than I'd imagined. I want to sell my house. Quietly. No signs. No leaks. And it has to close before the 15th. I watched his expression closely, looking for the flicker of skepticism I'd grown used to when people found out what I was asking. But Harlan just tapped a few keys, looked over his glasses, and nodded. "You want out before the party." I blinked. "You know about the party?" He gave a dry smile. "The Devereaux aren't exactly low profile. I've handled a few properties in that neighborhood. Word travels. But that's your business. Mine is making sure the transition is clean. I've got a couple from Austin, a design firm. They're coming in this week. All cash buyers. They've been looking for a turnkey property with soul. From what you've described, your house fits." I sat back, exhaling through my nose. They'll need to move quickly. Inspection, walkthrough, close, all before the gala. They're professionals, Harlan said, tapping his pen. They don't need hand-holding. If it fits, we move. It felt surreal, how simple he made it sound. But I didn't let the calm lull me into sentimentality. I had made my decision. The house wasn't mine anymore, not in spirit. I'd watched it become a stage for people who treated me like a lighting technician, essential, invisible, replaceable. The moment Camille's name hit the guest list, and not mine, something inside me snapped. Not out of rage, but clarity. I wasn't staying for the fight. I was preparing for my exit. By the end of the meeting, we'd signed preliminary agreements. Harlan moved with precision, each form another thread snipped from my attachment. When I returned home, the house looked different. Maybe it was the sunlight, or maybe it was that now I saw it for what it really was. Not a monument to my pride, but a shelf filled with expectations that no longer belonged to me. I opened the garage and started boxing things. Not in a rush, not frantically. Just steadily, like a man finally admitting the war was over and he'd lost the part of himself that once cared to win it. That evening, Raina walked in while I was folding my suits into a portable garment bag. She glanced at the boxes, but didn't ask. Maybe she didn't want the answer. Or maybe deep down, she knew this had been coming for longer than either of us had wanted to admit. "I thought you were going to help Camille pick a backdrop for the terrace," she said. I didn't even turn around. "I won't be here that day." Her silence stretched, long and stiff, until she finally responded, "Don't be dramatic." I zipped the bag slowly. "This isn't drama, Raina. It's dignity." The next morning, the buyers walked through the property. Eleanor and Madison, a couple in their early 40s, clean-lined aesthetic with eyes that lingered on details most people overlooked. They admired the handcrafted pergola in the back, the minimalist slate tile in the kitchen I'd installed during lockdown. Madison ran her fingers along the grain of the oak banister like it told a story only she could hear. "It feels lived in," she said quietly, like that was the highest compliment a house could receive. By that afternoon, they made an offer. All cash, slightly above asking. No contingencies. Harlan called me the second it went through. "They're in," he said. "Closing scheduled for the 13th. You've got a week. A week. 7 days to walk through every room and strip out every piece of me they hadn't already ignored. 7 days to vanish from their narrative without a fight, without a scream, without a plea for recognition. I liked it that way. Let them throw the party. Let them step onto the patio with flutes of champagne and hollow toasts. Let them smile for the Garretts and pretend their empire had no cracks. They'd find out in real time that the stage had shifted beneath their feet. The next task was the locks. I waited until the papers were notarized and filed before scheduling the locksmith. I didn't change them out of pettiness. I changed them because the house no longer belonged to me, and it definitely didn't belong to them. When the locksmith handed me the new keys, I held them in my palm like they were the final punctuation at the end of a long, unspoken sentence. I placed the old spare key in the flower pot by the front door, the one Celeste always used when she didn't want to ring the bell. I smiled at the small cruelty of it. She'd find it on party day, dig it out with that smug confidence she wore like perfume, and it wouldn't work. The locks wouldn't budge. The doors wouldn't open. Their access would end right there, on the welcome mat of a story that no longer included them. I moved into a condo across town. A place with high ceilings and no memories. No one knew me there. I liked that. The neighbors didn't ask about Raina, didn't inquire about dinner parties or birthday galas. The silence was unfamiliar, but not unwelcome. It was the sound of starting over. I forwarded my mail, canceled the utilities, transferred the title insurance. Then I circled the 15th on my calendar and read, the day of Camille's party, the day their illusion would unravel. Not because I told them off, not because I showed up and made a scene, but because I wouldn't be there at all. It was already in motion. The quietest, cleanest revenge I could ever hope for. And I didn't even need to raise my voice. 8 days. That was how long I had before Camille's birthday bash, before the Devereaux turned my home into their private playground. But this time, they wouldn't be dancing on my silence. Every box I taped shut, every drawer I emptied, felt like chiseling my way out of a role I never auditioned for. The countdown had begun, not just for them, but for me. And with each day that ticked closer to the gala, I felt more detached from the version of myself who once tried to earn their approval. The truck started arriving that Monday. I was still living in the house, though most of my things were already packed or sold. My closet was reduced to a single row of shirts, and my fridge held only almond milk, leftover curry, and a single bottle of Malbec I'd been saving for no occasion in particular. At 9:14 a.m., a catering van parked in the circular driveway. A young guy in a black polo stepped out holding a clipboard and asked if this was the right location for Event Devereaux. He didn't look me in the eye, just waved toward the backyard and asked, "Where should we set up the champagne fountain?" I didn't answer. I just stared at him. Not angrily, not even with irritation. Just empty. I was done playing host in a house I no longer claimed. After a few seconds of awkward silence, he blinked and said, "Okay, we'll scout it out." Then he disappeared around the corner, talking into a Bluetooth headset as if I were invisible. Another truck came at noon, lighting equipment. Then a pair of valet scouts with walkie-talkies and matching slacks. They discussed parking logistics, debated whether the street was wide enough for guest drop-off and red carpet installation. One of them asked if I was part of the team. I nearly laughed. In a way, I guess I was the team they didn't bother acknowledging. I was in the middle of boxing up books in my office when Raina came in. She had a smoothie in one hand and her phone in the other, scrolling through emails or Instagram. I couldn't tell which. Her heels clicked across the hardwood like punctuation marks in a sentence I didn't care to read. She looked at the stack of boxes, at the half-empty shelves. "You're really going through with this?" she asked, like I was the one breaking something sacred. I didn't look up. "You already did," I said. She sighed, the dramatic kind of sigh that people use when they want to remind you how exhausting you are to love. "You're overreacting. This is just family. One party. It doesn't mean anything." I turned then, slowly, pointed at the card still pinned to the corkboard. The invitation. The one addressed to the Dupree residence with no mention of my name, my contribution, my existence. Why wasn't I mentioned? I asked, though I already knew the answer. She shrugged. That shrug cut deeper than any insult ever could. Not because it was cruel, but because it was careless. It told me that somewhere along the line, I stopped mattering to her. Not in a loud, dramatic way. In a quiet, eroding way, like salt water eating through metal. My name, my voice, my boundaries, they'd all become optional. "That shrug," I said, "cost you everything." She blinked, like I'd spoken in another language. "I'm being done," I said, cutting her off. Done explaining myself to a family who never saw me. Done being used as a backdrop for someone else's celebration. Done pretending that silence is love. I left that night. No suitcase this time. I'd already moved the essentials to my new condo. I didn't slam doors or shout final words. I just turned off the lights, shut the door behind me, and walked away. I didn't even leave a note. 2 days later, I forwarded all mail to the new address. I notified the buyers of the final walkthrough schedule. Madison responded with enthusiasm. She and Eleanor were flying in a day early, wanted to see the place once more before they moved in officially. We picked a time, 3 p.m. on the day of Camille's gala. Perfect. The poetic symmetry of it didn't escape me. While the Devereaux gathered outside in designer gowns, toasting Camille's milestone with flutes of imported champagne and carefully curated smiles, the house they thought they still owned would be slipping out of their grip. Silently, legally, completely. The rest of the week was a blur of quiet preparations. I visited the new condo every night, setting up small pieces of normalcy. My speakers, a favorite framed photo of my late grandfather, a worn paperback I always reread when I need clarity. It wasn't big. It wasn't impressive, but it was mine. No one's name hovered over it like a shadow. No one would assume access. Back at the house, the tempo picked up. More calls, more deliveries. I didn't engage. The event planners seemed mildly annoyed, but too busy to confront me. Raina had stopped texting. Celeste didn't bother pretending anymore. I became a ghost in their script, and they were too self-absorbed to notice I'd already exited the stage. The night before the party, I walked through the house one last time. Not to say goodbye, not to grieve, just to acknowledge. I paused at the garden bench I built for Raina our second year here. I stood in the kitchen where I once taught myself how to make her favorite risotto. I brushed my fingers along the banister where she used to sit and talk to me during late-night projects. And then I locked the door behind me. One last time. The countdown was nearly over. They had no idea what was coming. And that, somehow, made it all the more satisfying. At 3:58 p.m., I sat in a corner booth at Riley's rooftop cafe, sipping an Americano that had long since gone cold. I wasn't there for the view of the skyline or the overpriced pastries. I was there because it offered a perfect angle on the security cam feed from my former house. My phone screen glowed with a split view. Front door, backyard, and the long driveway I'd resurfaced just last year. The place looked stunning. Of course it did. I'd poured everything into making it that way. Clean lines, Warm lighting, native plants blooming right on cue. And now, it was about to become a stage for a party hosted by people who believed it belonged to them. The first car pulled up at exactly 4 o'clock. A black Escalade, tinted windows, slow roll to the front gate like royalty arriving. A woman in red heels stepped out, checked her phone, and glanced around as if waiting for someone to open the door. Then another vehicle pulled in behind her. Then 5 more. It was like watching a slow-moving luxury parade. Guests in tailored suits and designer dresses climbing out of Benzes, Porsches, and Lexus SUVs, greeting each other with their kisses and faux surprise. At 4:07 p.m., the stars of the show arrived. Celeste descended from a vintage cherry-colored Rolls-Royce in a floor-length crimson gown that looked like it belonged on an award stage, not a suburban driveway. Wallace emerged behind her, already barking something into his phone. He glanced at the house like it was a spotlight just waiting to make him feel important. Celeste, in full Queen of the Gala mode, made her way confidently to the front door, heels clicking against the stone walkway I had laid myself one afternoon 6 summers ago. She reached into the flower pot to the right of the porch, the one that always held the spare key. Her signature move. She found it, just as I knew she would. She inserted it into the front door lock, gave it a practiced twist, and it didn't budge. She tried again, slower this time, tilting her head. The camera caught the flicker of confusion on her face. She looked at Wallace. He shrugged and said something I couldn't hear. She tried the key again, harder this time. Still nothing. Then came the knock, 3 quick raps on the wood, followed by a pause. No answer. Of course not. Behind her, a delivery truck from Belgado rolled up with Camille's birthday cake. The driver stepped out, opened the side panel, and stared blankly at the growing confusion on the porch. The cake was tiered, for levels of pale pink and gold fondant, wrapped in white ribbon and delicate sugar roses. I imagined it starting to sweat under the sun. Celeste fished out her phone and started dialing. On my screen, I saw her lips move with increasing frustration. Wallace paced near the front door, his arms crossed tightly. The caterers, who'd just finished unloading trays of hors d'oeuvres, hovered awkwardly near the garage, unsure whether to start setting up. Some guests lingered by their cars, checking their watches. The energy shifted. The glamour was cracking at the edges. And that was just the beginning. By 4:15, 2 florists stood outside with buckets of hydrangeas and peonies, looking like lost children on the first day of school. One of them knocked, then rang. Nothing. Celeste began pacing, waving her phone like it was a sword meant to cut through the absurdity. The camera caught the moment she turned to Wallace and barked something furious. He turned red, then threw his hands in the air. At 4:17, a valet attempted to direct cars further down the street as more arrivals jammed the driveway. But without access to the property, guests had no instructions, no cues. People started huddling in groups, whispering, checking their phones, texting Reina, texting Camille. Some laughed awkwardly. Others looked annoyed. The sun glinted off the champagne flutes the servers had started handing out, trying to salvage the optics. But there was no music, no host, no entry. Then came the moment that shifted the entire tone of the evening. At 4:20, Camille arrived in a cream convertible, waving like royalty. She stepped out, greeted a few friends, and made her way toward the front door. She had on a sparkling silver dress that shimmered like glass when she moved. She looked ready for the cameras, ready for praise, ready for a celebration of herself. But when she reached her mother and saw the panic on her face, her expression darkened. I watched as Camille grabbed the key from Celeste and tried it herself. It jammed. She jiggled it. Nothing. Her hands went at her hips. Her lips tightened. Wallace stepped forward, started knocking again, this time louder, angrier. Still no answer. Because there was no one inside. No staff. No host. No open doors. The house was empty. Sold. Locked. At 4:23, it started. #Devereaux disaster. Someone, probably one of Camille's influencer friends, began live-streaming the chaos. The caption read, "When the host can't get into her own party." The video panned to Wallace yelling at a valet, demanding to know why the front gate hadn't been opened sooner. Another clip showed Celeste furiously shaking the door handle, her red gown billowing as she stomped back and forth. A meme surfaced before the clock even hit 4:30, a still image of Celeste yelling into the Ring camera, overlaid with the words, "This is our house." The internet had its new obsession. I sipped my Americano, scrolling through the chaos. Eleanor, the new buyer, texted me. "You watching?" I sent back. "Front row. You sure you don't want to be here?" I smiled. "No need. The live stream is perfect." My phone buzzed again, unknown numbers. Likely Celeste. Then Camille. Then Reina. I silenced each one. The noise wasn't mine to manage anymore. I'd left them exactly what they had asked for, a house to entertain in, just not the one they assumed still belonged to them. The last image I saw before I locked the phone and leaned back into my chair was Camille, standing in the middle of the lawn, staring at the front door with her arms folded and her face frozen in something between disbelief and rage. Guests were fanning themselves, confused and murmuring, as the sky began to turn golden. A stage had been built, yes, but the script? That was mine. My phone buzzed 4 times in quick succession: Celeste, Camille, Reina, and Wallace. I let it ring, then fall silent. No voicemails, just raw desperation vibrating against the cool metal of the cafe table. I turned the device over, screen down, and sipped the last of my cold Americano. Around me, no one seemed to notice that a quiet revenge was unfolding across town. Couples laughed at other tables. A barista shouted a name. Jazz music hummed low in the background. But on my screen, the Devereaux social season centerpiece was unraveling in real time. By 4:23 p.m., it had gone from exclusive gathering to unintentional comedy. The hashtag Devereaux disaster was trending within my city's local social scene. Apparently, someone had live-streamed Wallace yelling at the valet driver, shouting something about being a major donor to city projects, as if that granted him universal entry into private property. Another guest caught Celeste on camera furiously pressing the Ring doorbell again and again while shouting, "This is our house. We're the Devereaux." Someone turned that moment into a meme within minutes. Celeste's face, mid-scream, frozen in a perfect blend of panic and arrogance, captioned, "When the guest of honor can't honor the lock." I nearly choked on my coffee laughing. Meanwhile, Camille was flailing. One video showed her storming back toward her convertible, heels sinking into the lawn, throwing her hands in the air. The once carefully curated elegance of her birthday ensemble had frayed. Hair windswept, lipstick slightly smudged, and her posture, the perfect Devereaux posture, gone. She was unraveling, one thread of entitlement at a time. Her fans, her friends, her carefully managed image were watching her lose composure in a driveway she assumed would welcome her like a red carpet. And all the while, behind that locked front door, nothing moved. No staff, no decor, no lavish charcuterie table or perfectly plated hors d'oeuvres. Just silence, stillness. A house waiting for its rightful owners, who weren't them. Reina hadn't called me directly in over a week, and now she was trying back to back. I tapped the screen, dragged down the notification tray, and scrolled through her messages. "Reina, Chris, what the hell is going on? Where are you? The key doesn't work. Why is the house locked? We need to talk. Now." I didn't reply, because I wasn't part of that we anymore. The moment she chose silence when I asked why I wasn't listed on the invitation, when she chose her family's convenience over my dignity, she stopped being my partner. She became a spectator in the life I had built, and then quietly helped dismantle it. Let her sit in the discomfort now. Let her learn what happens when someone chooses performance over partnership. Across the table, my phone buzzed again, this time from Eleanor. "Eleanor, front porch is now a war zone. Wallace looks like he's going to pop a vein." I replied, "Good thing he doesn't own the blood pressure medication tied to the deed." She sent back a laughing emoji and a photo Camille sitting on a garden chair, elbows on her knees, head in her hands. The angle was perfect. The birthday girl who couldn't get into her own party. A symbol of borrowed glamour sitting helpless in a space that no longer bowed to her family name. I could only imagine what Celeste and Wallace were doing behind the scenes. Calling lawyers, calling PR firms, trying to figure out how to spin the story. Because that's what the Devereaux did best, image control. But this time, there was no story to rewrite, no poor caterer to blame, no intern to fire. They built this tower of arrogance themselves and assumed everyone around them would hold it steady. And when it cracked, they had nothing but excuses and locked doors. My favorite moment came at 4:41 p.m. A neighbor, Mrs. Kendricks, bless her heart, walked over with a folding chair and offered it to a sweating valet standing in the middle of the lawn. She looked at the gathering storm of guests and asked, "Is there a reason none of you can get inside? You know the Dupree boys sold this place, right?" The video of that moment exploded. "Wait, what do you mean sold? Someone asked from behind the camera. I mean, the house belongs to a new couple. Just closed last week. Mrs. Kendricks replied with a shrug. Guess y'all weren't on the email chain. That clip went viral. Even people who didn't know the Devereaux directly were resharing it with captions like rich people problems, forgetting to check who owns the house before throwing a gala. Another comment, Camille wanted to be the queen of the party but forgot to own the castle. As I watched this circus unfold from afar, I realized something. I didn't feel angry. Not anymore. The resentment that had fueled my quiet retreat had been replaced by something else. Peace. It wasn't vindictive. It wasn't even gloating. It was the satisfaction of knowing I'd chosen myself after years of being overlooked. I hadn't screamed. I hadn't begged for recognition. I had simply stepped aside, reclaimed what was mine, and let their own actions echo louder than any speech I could have given. By 5 p.m., the guests began leaving in waves. The sun was dipping, casting long shadows across the lawn. The florists left with buckets still full. The caterers, realizing no access was coming, packed their food back into trays. Camille's birthday cake sat melting in the back of a van, its sugar roses wilting into syrupy curls. Even the photographer, after taking a few token shots of frustrated faces, slipped away with a sheepish smile. And the house, still perfect, still pristine, just no longer theirs. My final message of the evening came from Eleanor. Eleanor, we just pulled up to the house. That was the most satisfying drive of our lives. Can't wait to start fresh. I replied, welcome home. Make sure you toss that flower pot key. She responded with a photo. Madison holding the key high above a trash can, grinning, just before letting it fall in. I looked up from my screen, finally finishing my coffee. The skyline across from me had turned pink and gold, the city lights flickering on like stars waking up. Behind me, people were living normal lives. Happy hours, dates, laughter. And me? I had let go of a house, a marriage, a facade, and found something I hadn't felt in years. Freedom. No headlines. No confrontations. Just a locked door and a truth that finally closed behind it. At exactly 5:06 p.m., I opened my laptop, fingers resting lightly on the keyboard as I stared at a blank email. There was no music playing in the background, no ambient chatter, just the quiet hum of my new condo, half furnished and entirely mine. The footage of the failed gala still played on loop in my mind. Celeste screeching at the Ring camera, Camille's expression crumbling like stale cake, Wallace pacing like a caged CEO without a boardroom, and Raina, off to the side, looking small for once. Not center stage, not flanked by applause. Just a witness to everything she helped unfold. I cracked my knuckles once, inhaled slowly, and began typing. Subject: ownership to Raina Devereaux Dupree, Celeste Devereaux, Wallace Devereaux. I didn't dress it up with a greeting. No, dear. No, hello. They didn't deserve the soft edges. I went straight in. As of yesterday, the house at 411 West Thornhill no longer belongs to me. I understand there was some confusion during today's scheduled celebration. I trust the attached documents will clarify matters. I paused for a moment, rereading those lines. Not for tone, I wasn't worried about offending them. No, I was ensuring precision. The truth had to cut with clean edges. Attached you'll find the full sales agreement, deed transfer confirmation, and time-stamped closing documents. You used my home, my name, my silence. For years, you assumed access to my space without invitation. You hosted without permission. You made me invisible in a house I built, funded, repaired, and cherished. Today marks the final chapter in that erasure. Any continued presence on that property from this point forward will be treated as trespassing. I've instructed the new owners to contact authorities if anyone attempts to enter without permission. I hesitated for only a second before writing the final sentence. Sincerely, the failure, who bought that house without $1 of your help. Click. Sent. I sat back, breathing slowly, and waited, not for replies, but for the inevitable quiet that would follow. That silence was louder than any apology they could muster. More honest than any call Raina might try to make in the coming hours. I didn't need a reply. I needed them to sit with what they'd done and what I'd undone. 20 minutes passed. No buzz. No email return receipt. No flames of fury fired back through their usually instant reactions. Just the blank inbox screen, pulsing slightly in the late afternoon light. And it was perfect. I stood and walked to the sliding glass door that led to the small balcony of my new place. It wasn't grand. It didn't overlook a pool or boast a manicured lawn, but it had light. It had air. It had peace. I stepped outside, barefoot on the cool tiles, and stared out over the neighborhood. Nothing remarkable, just quiet homes and swaying trees, the kind of place people actually lived in, not performed in. I let the calm fill my chest like warm water. The absence of noise, of performance, of their constant, invisible expectations. Then I returned inside and opened the photo album I'd brought with me. I hadn't looked at it in a long time. Inside were memories they'd never acknowledge. Photos of me sanding the beams in the living room, of the day I finished laying tile in the kitchen, of Raina and me sitting on the newly built back steps eating takeout in year one of the renovation. I lingered on that last photo longer than I expected. She looked younger then, softer. So did I. We looked like two people who believed in the same future. But that was a lifetime ago. That belief had slowly been chipped away. Every time she let her parents talk over me, every time she asked me to just let it go, when Celeste made another backhanded comment, every time I became the man who came with the house. Until she no longer believed in me at all. Or worse, didn't care to. I closed the album. I didn't need to mourn anymore. That part of my life wasn't lost. It had been surrendered by people who never valued it to begin with. They discarded me for convenience. They expected I'd stay for loyalty. They miscalculated. I leaned back in my chair and opened the text thread with Raina. I hadn't replied to her latest stream of panicked messages. Raina, I need to explain. We didn't think you'd actually. They're furious. You've humiliated them. Chris, please. We can fix this. I hovered over the thread, thumbs paused. But I didn't reply. Not with a paragraph, not with a call, not even with a single period. She didn't need my words. She needed the void my words used to fill. The silence would say what I never could. Instead, I pulled up the audio message I'd saved from earlier, Mrs. Kendrick's voice from the viral clip, saying, "You know the Dupree boys sold this place, right?" It was simple, unassuming, true. And in that truth, all their arrogance had collapsed. The thought made me smile. They'd never see it coming. Not because I was particularly clever, but because they never believed I was capable of leaving. They assumed I'd stay silent, stay useful, stay invisible. They thought failure meant I had no power. Turns out, power isn't about volume. It's about timing, precision, and the decision to walk away while they're still performing. That night, as the sun bled into the sky and the world began to settle down, I poured myself a glass of that unopened Malbec. I took it out to the balcony, leaned against the rail, and watched the stars slowly punch through the fading blue. Behind me, my phone lit up with another buzz. Another message I didn't need to read. No closure. No invitation to talk it through. Just the final punctuation at the end of a long, silent sentence. Goodbye. It was just after 9 when the knock came. Not a polite, uncertain knock, the kind strangers use, but sharp, urgent, and patient. I let it go unanswered at first. I knew who it was before I even checked the peephole. Raina. She hadn't given up. And tonight, she was finally brave enough, or desperate enough, to show up in person. I opened the door slowly. She stood there with mascara streaked down her cheeks, and her phone clutched in both hands like it was a lifeline. Her dress, cream, satin, clearly meant for a party, had a wine stain blooming across the hem. Her eyes, those same eyes that once saw the potential in my half-finished pergola, were now rimmed red with fury and fear. "You humiliated us," she said, stepping forward like she owned the right. I didn't move. I didn't invite her in. "No," I said. I stopped playing along. She blinked, momentarily thrown off. Then she tried again. "Do you know what you've done? My parents are threatening to cut me off. Camille's wedding might get postponed. Sponsors are backing out. And people, our people, they're laughing at us." At me. I tilted my head slightly, curious. "And you think that's my fault? You locked us out of our own. It was never your house, Raina." My voice was low, calm, like a closed door. "You just lived there with me, until it became convenient to forget that." She looked like she was choking on a mouthful of words, but couldn't decide which to spit out first. Her hand shook, and for a moment, I thought she might scream. But instead, she just whispered, "You didn't have to go this far." I wanted to laugh. Not because it was funny, but because it was tragic. The distance between how much she had taken and how little she believed I could push back was staggering. This far? I repeated, "You erased me from my own home. You let your mother plan an entire party in the house I paid for, I built, I bled for. You didn't defend me when they called me a failure. You shrugged when I asked why my name wasn't even on the invitation. You made me invisible." She swallowed hard. "They wouldn't have let it happen if No," I cut in. "Don't do that. Don't pretend you were powerless. You let it happen because it was easier. Because you were afraid they'd cut you off, so you traded in your husband for their approval." Tears welled again. I didn't want this. I looked around the doorway, at my new place, the unfinished wall paint, the cardboard boxes in the corner, the cheap lamp casting too warm light. And yet, it was all mine. Honest, even in its imperfections. "Well, you got it anyway." She reached into her purse and pulled out something, our wedding photo, the one from the living room mantel. We were laughing in it, our hands still wrapped in each other's vows. Her thumb rubbed the edge like she could wear the past down to something smoother. "Is this really it?" she asked. "After everything?" I didn't look at the picture. I looked at her, really looked, past the tears and the drama and the panic. For a moment, I searched for the version of her I used to love. The woman who once sat on the porch with me eating store-brand noodles when we were broke. The woman who used to say things like, "It's us against the world." But she wasn't there anymore. She'd been replaced by someone who flinched when her parents frowned, who chose applause over partnership. The mask she wore had finally cracked, but it was too late. I'd seen what was underneath. I took a breath and said the truest thing I'd ever said to her. "They cut me off years ago, Raina. You just finally returned the favor." She looked like she'd been slapped. Her knees bent slightly, and for a second, I thought she might crumble right there. But she stayed standing. She wiped her face roughly with the back of her hand and exhaled through her nose. "Camille's wedding is going to be a disaster," she muttered. "They're saying we're the laughingstock of Briarwood." I almost smiled. "That sounds exhausting." She looked up at me, her eyes searching for a foothold. "I made mistakes," she said, softer now. "But I never thought you'd actually leave." I didn't answer right away. Instead, I turned and glanced back at the framed blueprint of my first solo landscaping project hanging on the hallway wall. It reminded me of something important. Growth only happens when something is uprooted. "I didn't leave," I said at last. "You all just stopped seeing me. I just finally saw myself again." There was nothing left to say after that. She knew it too. She looked down at the photo one last time, then quietly set it on the floor at my feet. "I'll send for the rest of my things," she whispered. I nodded once. She turned and walked away. No more shouting. No more bargaining. Just the fading echo of her heels down the hallway. The door clicked shut behind her, and I just stood there. Not broken. Not angry. Just whole. For the first time in years. 1 month later, I stood in front of a small, weathered porch just outside the city. The sky was pale gray, and the air held that scent of something about to bloom. The house wasn't much by Devereaux standards. No granite pillars, no heated driveway, no Instagram-worthy backyard. But it was real. A mid-century fixer-upper with creaky floorboards, chipped shutters, and a front door that needed coaxing to shut properly. I loved it immediately. I'd found it through Eleanor, the buyer who now lived in my old house. After the whirlwind of her move, she invited me over for coffee. She said her cousin, an interior painter and part-time gallery curator, had a listing I might like: quiet, forgotten, with enough character to start something new. It felt like fate. Or maybe just what happens when you stop trying to prove yourself to people who'll never see you clearly. The first time I walked through it, I didn't see flaws. I saw blank pages. Walls I could paint. Cabinets I could sand. A yard that needed sculpting. It had no pedigree, no legacy stamped onto it by generations of old money. Just potential. Raw. Untamed. Waiting. Now, the keys were mine. I stepped onto the porch and looked around. No champagne fountains. No grand announcements. No Garretts to impress. Just wind and the occasional creak of a nearby tree limb swaying under its own weight. I unlocked the door and pushed it open. Inside, the living room smelled faintly of sawdust and possibility. The floors were scratched, but solid. The kitchen still held a toaster oven left by the previous owner and a faded magnet that read, "This house runs on coffee, love, and second chances." I left it right there on the fridge. It felt appropriate. There were no ghosts in this place. No shadows of conversations I wasn't invited to. No moments of being spoken for or about like I didn't have a voice. It was quiet in the kind of way that made you feel present. Alive. I moved my boxes and slowly, choosing to take my time. Not because I needed to, but because I could. I'd spent so many years rushing, bending, proving, explaining. Here, I didn't have to perform. I could just be. In the bedroom, I set my tool bag down next to the window and pulled out the blueprints for a modest garden. Raised beds, native flowers, a corner bench for writing. I'd design it slowly as the seasons came. No showpieces, no approval needed, just something I could build for the sake of building. I taped the plan to the wall with painter's tape and stepped back. It was mine, all of it, not inherited, not borrowed, not handed down with terms and conditions. Mine. Later that afternoon, I received a message through Instagram. I hadn't checked my account in weeks. There hadn't been a need. But curiosity got the better of me. The name was unfamiliar. At reclaiminggrace_84, I saw the video of Celeste yelling into the camera. I didn't know who you were, but someone tagged your name in a comment. I just wanted to say thank you. You gave me the courage to move out of my in-laws' house last week. I've been silent for so long. I forgot what it felt like to choose myself. Watching you reclaim your peace helped me find mine. Thank you, Christopher. Truly. I read it twice. Then again, I hadn't expected that. I didn't do any of this for recognition. I wasn't a martyr or a movement. But somehow, in claiming my space back, I created space for someone else too. I typed a reply, reclaim your space. It's worth it. And it was. I finally understood that now. All the years I'd spent shrinking in rooms filled with loud egos and louder silences, trying to fit into a mold that had no space for who I really was. It wasn't failure to walk away. It was freedom. It was clarity. It was power. As evening approached, I stepped outside and sat on the porch with a coffee mug in hand. The same chipped ceramic one I used in the old house. It wasn't expensive, but it had history, mine. I looked out at the gravel driveway, the overgrown hedges, the mailbox that leaned slightly to the left. It wasn't perfection. It was peace. The sky turned to ash and lavender, and a few fireflies danced across the yard. Somewhere nearby, a wind chime sang. No parties. No stage lights. No audience. And for once, that was enough, because I finally understood something they never did. Success isn't found in applause. It's in the quiet after. The life you build when no one's watching. The foundation laid not with money or influence, but with self-respect and intention. The house that doesn't need validation to feel like home. I closed my eyes and let the breeze roll through me. I was no longer part of the Devereaux performance. I was the architect of something new, and I had just poured the foundation. Alone, but finally, completely, on my own terms.